Today we have another fine guest on Saptarishis Astrology. And the person we're going to meet today is Marc Boney. And many of us are aware of this fine fellow and his research and the work that he's done. He's recently brought out his second book. And today I understand he is going to share with us some of his experience in working with Jaimini. And now, if we could all welcome Marc Boney and be prepared for a wonderful lecture. Marc, please come and tell us how you got into Jyotish, what your journey has been like, and basically, how would you encourage other people to follow in similar footsteps?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me, Phyllis. And maybe I should amend something here. You know, two books of mine have been actually published in Russian.
Oh.
But this book that just came out is actually just the first book in English. I've written like 32 articles that are on Amazon.com, small ebooks, but this is the first print edition of an English book. You saw here, it was entitled The Essentials of Jaimini. And it's a course actually that I was doing last year and again this year as well. So first of all, you asked me a little bit about my background with Jyotish. Some who may know that I was actually involved in Western astrology for 20 years.
Most of us were.
Most of us were here, especially in the U.S. That's all there was in the U.S.
Yes, that's true.
And then, that all changed when first Dr. Raman came here in a conference organized by David Frawley. And then the next year, 1993, the invited chief guest was K N Rao. And that changed my life.
It's amazing how we can name the people who changed our directions.
And, I'll tell you just quickly, I'll make the story as brief as possible as to why it changed my life. He gave his address, and there was hundreds of people in the audience. And then afterwards he said, well, if anyone wants to come and sort of visit with me, you can join me in my hotel room.
Wow.
So I made a beeline up there, but even when I arrived, the place was completely packed. But I was determined to spend some time with him. So I climbed over people. They weren't too happy with me about that. And the only space was right in front of him. And after a while, he looked at me and he said, do you know your horoscope? And I said, sure. So I started to hand him my birthday. He said, no, please just dictate. And so I started giving him my planetary positions, all that sort of thing. And then amazingly, just within seconds, Phyllis, he started reeling off a series of statements about my life that were amazingly true.
Mm-hmm.
You're the only male heir of your parents, but you have 4 or 5 sisters. Well, I am the only male son of my parents, and I have 5 sisters.
Wow.
And then he said, good all-around education, classical education, studied literature. Absolutely true. My parents valued education. They sent me the best schools money could buy. I got a good liberal arts education. I majored in English literature as an undergrad. Right? I won't elaborate. He went on about this, and I was astonished. I thought maybe he was psychic, not just an astrologer, something that happened a lot to him that he used to find pretty amusing.
Yeah.
I think he does have something of a siddhi, in terms of highly developed intuitive powers, but he was doing astrology. And so, of course, the next day he was doing a workshop on how to predict the birth of children. Mm-hmm. So of course, that came back to San Diego, and just out of the blue, somebody asked me if I could predict when they could, have a child. They were having trouble getting pregnant. I applied his techniques, gave a prediction, and probably beginner's luck, but it came out.
Wow.
And so, I said, well, I'm going to study with this man. He knows what he's talking about. Mm. And then the next year, just a year later, also in the same place, San Rafael up in Northern California, he was offering the first course on Jaimini in the U.S., right, which I came to know was something of a specialty of his.
Okay.
He started his presentation by saying, if you really wanted to go into the spiritual, the horoscope from a spiritual angle, you needed to know Jaimini. Well, this was my big interest. So that really got my attention, right? And then when I came back from that conference, I discovered something that kind of amazed me, kind of a serendipitous experience. Back in the mid-'80s, I had a friend who was a chief psychiatrist at a big hospital in Chicago. We used to discuss the charts of his patients with Western astrology, right?
Yeah,
He was also a Jungian analyst, and he had a
so was my first mentor.
All right, you know, he was a Jungian analyst, and he had a friend who was a Jungian analyst who was an Indian and would go to India every year. Well, after discovering my friend's interest in astrology, brought him back 2 little books, you know,
Right.
and he looked at them, didn't make any sense to him at all. So he just gave them to me. I looked at them, didn't make any sense at all, and I just stuck them on my bookshelf. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Well, 10 years later, I'm just kind of going through some, you know how you put some books in the back of your shelf that you don't ever look at?
Yeah.
Okay? Well, I pulled these out and discovered that the 2 books was Dr. B.V. Raman's Studies in Jaimini, and then his grandfather's book, B. Suryanarayana Rao, which was the first English translation on the Jaimini Sutras. You know, and I was kind of like, oh my God.
Talk about serendipity.
Yeah.
It was almost, books were meant to come into my hands, but, you know, it's like, you know, I wasn't ready for them yet. I was going to need them down the road, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So it sort of makes me felt that I've, you know, studied this before, maybe in a previous life. So, you know, but then, you know, K N Rao had some very innovative methods for doing Jaimini. And I started publishing some books on that, which I, you know, just devoured. And I really love the system. And one of the reasons, and I talked to my students about this, one of the reasons I love the system is that, you know, I just published an article called Elegant Simplicity. And it's an article about the use of Charadasha. Because, you know, very often, you know, anyway, K N Rao's calculation of Charadasha, I should qualify that. And very often events can come out very simply, very straightforwardly, you know, in this kind of system. And what I mean by that, and I won't pull up a chart to talk about it, I'll just mention it. You know, there's the planet with the fewest degrees amongst all the grahas, as you know, designated as the Dharakaraka, indicator of spouse, right?
Yeah.
And the person, you know, runs the period of a sign containing the Dharakaraka, or from where the Dharakaraka falls 7th. And this could happen in both the Rashi or Navamsha. Then very over and over again, I was seeing that, this is what he taught, I was seeing that this was a time when a person would marry or maybe get into a serious relationship. And this is a very simple thing. It's just involving just a couple of factors. It's not a complex analysis, right?
True.
And it doesn't always come out that simple. I'm not trying to imply that.
That's one key technique, what you just taught us.
Sure. Sometimes it does. And I've predicted very successfully on this basis any number of times. Another thing is that, you know, he sort of discovered that the AMK, planet with the 2nd highest degrees, is something of a career indicator.
Yeah.
And a Madhya Karaka, or a Madhya is a very important person, somebody in a king's council, right? Advisor to the king. And so, you know, his thought process is that, well, when this planet can make you more important yourself, it can give you position, it can give you status. And again, the principle is very simple. When you're running the sign containing the AMK, or a sign from where the AMK falls 10th, you'll see so often how these periods can time a period when a person gets a position, their status increases. It's a good position career-wise.
Okay.
I applied that to my own chart, found it was the basis of something that he told me when I had my first consultation with him. Right?
Wow. So that's when the AMK's dasha starts running, is when you see that, or the 10th from the
that's the idea. That's and again, it's more complicated than that. There's things that are additional, but sometimes it's actually just that simple too. And again, I predicted on this basis and found it to be a working principle that's very good. I just, you know, I told a story recently to one article, Elegant Simplicity, where a fraternity brother of mine, a good college friend, was asking me about whether he'd get a position last year. I saw that he was running the sign containing an AMK, and there was more to it than that. There was certainly Jaimini Raja yogas, and in a certain sub-period where that was going to fall 10th.
Okay.
And I can show you this. And I said, you know, yes, looks like you're going to get it. And he did. You know, so this is what I mean when I say that in the Jaimini system, sometimes events can come out with a great level of simplicity, and I would say even what I call elegant. Right?
Sure.
Definitely.
You know, and this is what I illustrate in my book. I called it a practical guide, you can see.
Yeah.
Because, you know, I wanted it to be very practical. How do you use this stuff? You know, not just the theoretical aspect of it. Although, you know, I also say here that this contains an original translation and commentary on the first adaya, first pada of the sutra.
Very interesting.
It was very, very common in Sanskrit texts, ancient Sanskrit texts, where they're astrological texts, where the very first part of it, they would give all the fundamental principles, right? All the foundational principles
Sure.
for which to understand the rest of it, right? And that's what Jaimini does in the first adaya, first padya. And at one point I got very frustrated with my study of the Jaimini sutras because I was relying on English translation. And, you know, as you may have noticed, different translators were translating different sutras in a different way, right? And ascribing to them different meaning. And so I started to feel that maybe they were more giving a translation that was an understanding of what they thought the sutra said, as opposed to a literal translation, right? So what I've done in this book is I've taken those sutras in that first pada, and I've broken them down word for word. Here's what each of the Sanskrit word in the sutra can mean, right?
Okay.
And then I've given its literal, what it literally means, which of course with these sutras are not complete sentences. They're so compact, right? But then I've given a more elaborate English sentence translation along with a commentary as to what I feel the sutra means. With regards to this, right?
This is a valuable contribution that you've made. Very, very valuable.
Well, you know, I'm not the first, but I hope people do find it valuable. The reason I did it is I wanted them to see what I was able finally to see. What does this sutra actually say? Okay, you know, what it might mean and how we might interpret it may be open to different perspectives, right? But here's what the actual Sanskrit says. And now you can see that too. Right? That's why I wanted to do that for beginning students in particular. But, you know, not the whole Jaimini Sutras. This is just, you know, some...
Oh, not the whole thing?
Well, that's coming up soon. So.
I couldn't resist, Mark. Couldn't resist.
By the time that comes, I mean, I'm sure we are going to read this and be ready for the big one.
Well, we'll see. But anyway, that's also a part of this book, and that's why I did that.
Fantastic.
But, you know, I say also in the beginning of the book that my purpose in writing the book was, you know, my purpose in life now is to continue the legacy of my teacher, K N Rao, right? Meaning, you know, my purpose in life now is to teach what he taught me, right? And therefore perpetuate that legacy. And, you know, he started, the first book on Jaimini was this very famous, groundbreaking book called Predicting Through Jaimini's Chardasha, right? You may have heard of it.
Yes, I have that.
And, you know, I've probably read it 25 times. And, you know, it's a wonderful book, and I recommend it to anyone. But, you know, people have told me, and I find it true myself, that sometimes it's not always clear as to how he arrived at certain conclusions, right? In other words, he goes from A to D without talking about C and B. and that's not a criticism. I'm just saying that's the fact. So what I was trying to do in this book is try to fill in some of those, connect the dots as to what he was, you know, talking about. For example, you know, when you are interpreting any sign period, you want to see, first of all, if there's any planets in that sign, right? And you have to use those grahas at 3 levels. Okay. The first level is just the most basic level, Shubha Ashubha Yoga. Is it the influence of a natural benefic? Is it the influence of a natural malefic, right? If the planet in the sign is a natural benefic or malefic, that's level number 1. That yields some meaning, can yield some meaning, right? That's interpretable. Secondarily, natural karaka. That is, what does it signify in terms of its, you know, naisargika or natural significations, which is one thing I'm going to talk about here when I show you about something that my researchers have shown. And then finally, of course, what karaka is it amongst the charakarakas? The special karakas based on exact degrees. Of course, this is controversial. You know, 8 versus 7.
Oh, I
K,
do remember that.
K N Rao, of course, is adamant about, you know, at least in his approach, that he uses 7. I follow his example. And so that's a third level. And so this is what I try to spell out in the book and show illustrations. So let me just take a quick drink here. So I thought it might be interesting for viewers to, and you know, with Jaimini, it employs special karakas more than any, you know, many special karakas, but I mean special lagnas. I misspoke, special lagnas.
Yeah.
You know, he devotes by far and away in those chapters of the Jaimini Sutras that we have, and there's the idea that many are missing. By far and away, the chapter that is devoted to the most sutras, I think it's 128, is, as you're probably aware, those effects of the planets from Kamsha Lagna, right?
Okay. Yeah.
And this, of course, alone clues us into the fact that whoever wrote this text, Sage Jaimini, really emphasized analysis and interpretation of a birth chart from that perspective, right?
Mm-hmm.
So let me just pull up, let me share screen. And I'm going to pull up the chart of, you recognize this chart? Donald Trump. Donald Trump.
No.
Donald Trump.
I'm looking for a North Indian.
Okay, you'll get that.
Can you do one of each?
Yeah, of course. I meant to. I'm sorry. I did it wrong here. Let me do this here. Okay.
Good.
That's brilliant. Thank you.
You should have that now. And note that the karakas are listed down in this table down here.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, I'm wanting to put 7 karakas, and for some reason I've got 8 in here. So
there may be a reason for that.
no, there's not. Wait a second. 7 karakas. Okay. All right. You with me here?
Yep. Okay.
Okay. So now, just to give viewers who may be not that familiar with Jaimini, you should be familiar with this, that you employ the Kamsha Lagna, right? So I'm going to bring that up. And so if we employ the Kamsha Lagna, I'm going to use it back in the birth chart, right? So we see that his Kamsha Lagna is Virgo, and I'll do this over here now as well. Are we seeing it now?
Yeah, that's great.
Okay. So you may be aware, I'm sure you are, Phyllis, that there's a, you know, Jaimini Sutra in that chapter on the effects of planets from Kamsha that says that when Mercury goes to the 10th house from the Kamsha Lagna, that alone can make a person very successful in their line of endeavor, right? But then it says that if that planet Mercury gets the additional influence of a natural benefic, well, then that is something even more so, and it's sustained over a longer period of time. There's also references to the idea that when only natural benefics fall in the angles from the Kamsha Lagna, well then, you know, as it says so often in the classics, the person becomes a king or they're equal. You recognize what I'm talking about?
Yes, I do.
Yes.
Yep.
And so this is exactly what we see in the chart of Donald Trump. And of course, you know, he became president in the major period of Gemini, which is the 10th house from her Kamsha Lagna. And it contains these 2 combinations, this idea of Mercury in the 10th under the influence of additional natural benefic. And then also from this perspective, there are only natural benefics in the angles from Kamsha Lagna. Then we come to the strength of planets. Of course, you know, it's not just any old Mercury in the 10th, it's Mercury in its own sign, right? And Jupiter here, you know, it's not real obvious, but you may be aware that on the day Trump was born, it was going from retrograde to direct, which of course can make a planet very powerful, right? And so it was in his major period of Gemini that he literally has become a king. It was in the sub-period of Cancer, and you'll see that these planets in Cancer fall in the 11th house from there. But according to how K N Rao teaches Jaimini, they also are involved in a number, multiple Jaimini Raja Yogas. One would be defined, first of all, both of these planets are Vargotama, as you'll notice, since they fall in the first Navamsha of Cancer. And his AK, planet with the highest degrees, with 7 Karakas, is the Sun. It's in a mutual Rashi Drishti, mutual sign site, with Saturn as the DK, which according to K N Rao forms a Jaimini Raja Yoga. But also there's the special Moon-Venus Jaimini Raja Yoga, and also Dhan Yoga that happens here as a result of the mutual Rashi Drishti between Venus and the Moon, who's the AMK of this chart. My point is that there are strong planets in the 11th year of victory and honors, right? In the 11th house from the Karakamsha Lagna, there's the presence of Jaimini Raja Yogas of various sorts, right? And it was in this sub-period of Cancer that he became president. The sub-period, and when I say period, I'm talking about K N Rao's calculation of Charadasha. In the sub-period, it happened, it was Scorpio containing his AMK, coming back to that principle. Right? So, this is a K N Rao, you might say, Jaimini style analysis that's incorporating, the yogas given in the sutras themselves, but also the ones that he talks about in his book, Predicted Through Jaimini Charadasha, some of whom are given in Parashara Hora. They don't actually appear, say like the AMK combination, they don't appear in the sutras themselves. Jaimini gives the different types of Raja Yogas there, but the combination is going to be found in the chapter on Raja Yogas in Parashara Hora, as you may be well aware, including the Moon-Venus combination. So is that clear? Do you think there'd be questions about anything about that before we go on?
I think that was quite clear, and I think many of the viewers are going to appreciate the variety.
Hopefully.
And hopefully they'll stop the recording and go back and take notes, and so that they fully understand it. Sometimes it takes a while for the viewers to realize they can stop these lectures so that they can take good notes.
It's a good thing. It's a good thing to mention. So now, this is not through my program, but through a document. You should be showing a document that's showing both the North and Indian style chart of the former Supreme Court Justice Rehnquist. Do you see that?
Yes, I do. I see the two patterns.
And it might be better. It might be better if I pull this up in my. Can you give me a moment here?
Most certainly.
Well, what's happening here? I'm going to pull this up.
Well, the screen that you had up was very clear. There was no.
I get you, but let me just do this here. I think it'll be better, actually. Just one moment. Maybe you can even edit this portion out here when you, here we go. I found what I was looking for. Okay, let me go back to the document. Yeah, I'm going to share my screen again.
Wonderful. I wanted to remind you that by showing one technique at a time, there may be some value in that, so that
I understand.
We can meet again.
I understand, and this is what I'm going to be doing in this case, okay?
Perfect.
So, here's the birth chart of William Rehnquist, and you'll see that the 7 Karaka table is at the bottom. It's not in the chart itself, which is what I was trying to do, but it was taking too much time. But one of the things, I mentioned to you in our preliminary conversation, Phyllis, that, most everything I teach, in fact, I'd say 99% of what I teach with regards to Jaimini, this is what I learned from K N Rao.
Mm-hmm.
in course, in 20 years of experience, I have come across some things myself that were more observations that I just came through experience that then I talked to K N Rao about, and he sort of confirmed the idea. But one of these is that I began to notice that when a person ran certain periods from where there are certain exchanges going on, favorable exchanges of house lords, I began seeing how those periods tended to be very notable. It wasn't the only reason, but and here's an example of this. If you make Sagittarius the Lagna in the chart of William Rehnquist, you'll see that there's an exchange from there between the 9th and the 10th lords, right? Mercury and the Sun exchange.
Yes. Okay.
Now, it was in this major period that he became the Supreme Court Justice. Now, there's all kinds of additional reasons for this. If you calculate the Jaimini Raja Yogas according to K N Rao, almost every one of 10 of them exists. In particular, sort of the mutual glance here between the AK Mercury and the AMK Moon.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
Falling in the 11th house again of, sort of honors and awards. You have to be nominated to become the Supreme Court Justice. But, see how strong that exchange becomes from the Dasha Lagna, that is the sign that was running at the time that he obtained this position. Again, and what I'm using here is K N Rao's calculation of Chara Dasha. That's the sign Dasha I'm using in all these examples. So this is something I started noting a number of times here, and I want to show some additional examples of it as I scroll through this document. People should be familiar with who Britney Spears is, right?
I think most people are.
I'm sure everybody knows Britney, yeah.
Okay, original Princess of Pop, but she first became the Princess of Pop at a young age, I think it was 17, 18, when she was running her major period of Scorpio. So again, if you make Scorpio the Lagna, then see what happens between Mars and the Sun from there. What do you see?
Mm-hmm.
Becomes a 110 exchange, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Now, another thing I was making note of is I talked about how, one first level of analysis or different levels of analysis when you're evaluating the grahas contained within the sign period that you're running. And you'll see here that it contains the Sun. And you'll note that the Sun, is going to be in a very strong position here. And so what I started noting is that when a person runs the period of some planet containing the Sun, some of those natural significations of the Sun can come out during that time. And some of those natural, it can be stardom, can be celebrity, or just the fact that your personal significance increases, or it's a period where you can shine more.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now, if additionally, such as Sun is involved in and connected to Jaimini Raja Yogas, well then it's going to be all the more the case.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And I started seeing these two things, this idea of favorable exchanges from a Dasha Lagna and what kind of results that period gave, and also a sign containing the Sun. Now, if that Sun has some source of strength, like in its own or exaltation sign, either in the birth chart or the Rashi, then my experience is that that's going to be all the more so. And I have to scroll down here and I'm going to find some additional examples of this in this article that I wrote that contains these illustrations. Right? Keep going here, Mark. Okay.
This is going to be very valuable for the viewers because they will have something tangible there. And
I hope so.
Yes, this is very good. And I'm looking forward to another session with such valuable information.
Okay, so should we continue now?
Errol Flynn. Oh yes, of course. Let's finish Errol Flynn.
Well, I think I'd like to do a couple more just to bring the point home. That's okay.
Okay, that's fine.
This is the chart of Errol Flynn, famous Hollywood movie star from the 30s and 40s. I loved his movies growing up as a boy. Mm-hmm. And the film that two films. Captain Blood is when his initial stardom came out, and then what he's most known for is that famous film, The Adventures of Robin Hood, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, this happened in his Virgo Mahadasha. So if you use Virgo as a lagna, then what happens to the exchange between Mercury and Venus?
Venus, yeah.
Venus-Mercury exchange.
Becomes a very favorable 9-10 exchange, right?
Very favorable.
And then so many Raja Yogas forming there, including the special Moon-Venus Raja Yoga. And here's the other thing. Not only when the sun is in the sign that you're running, but when it falls 10th.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Which is what, again, it's doing here, right? Now, see, where I first kind of started thinking about this, well, I'll give just quick another example. Here's a chart of another movie star, Julie Christie, got very big international stardom when she appeared as the character of Lara in Dr. Zhivago, right?
Right.
This would have happened in her Aries Mahadasha. Put your finger on Aries, use it as a lagna, see what happens between Mars and Saturn.
Yes.
110 exchange.
Again,
yeah, exchange.
Now look at the sun there, exalted Vargotama.
Yeah.
And I believe in this case that Jupiter becomes her AMK. Yes, it does. So all those factors are there. Very predictable on this basis that the Aries period was going to prove extraordinary. Now look at Indira Gandhi here. This is the chart where I first started noticing this. She first became prime minister in her Scorpio period.